Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
Welcome to this first episode of Meanwhile Here on Earth on KGRA with me, your host, Peter Robbins. Before we get started on this first show, there are two people I'd like to thank right at the beginning here. One is my producer, Mr. Race Hobbs, founder of KGRA, and the amazing voice that you heard on that introduction. The other is one of my dearest, oldest friends, my soul brother, Albert Bouchard, legendary founding member of the Blue Oyster Cult who wrote that tune. Now, if there seems to be something wrong with the video in this broadcast, the great majority of what we used to call radio shows, now televised as well, rest easy. This first broadcast is brought to you in glorious black. Like radio of the past, so relax, let yourself rediscover the theater of your minds. Something that used to be such a central part of our parents' and grandparents' media experiences. Next week when we return, it will be in glorious lifelike color with my first guest. But for the duration of the next 2 hours, it's just you and me. The reason for this is simple. My extensive team of hair and makeup people are still self-isolating, and current circumstances did not allow me to pick up my tuxedo from the cleaners. So for those of you out there who do not actually know me, I am 6'3" and bear an uncanny resemblance to the great actor Cary Grant, or so the voices in my head tell me. Actually, I'm not 6'3", but I'm only off by a number. I'm 5'3". And what do the voices in my head know? I hadn't intended to dedicate this show to anyone, but I am. And that is another dear friend, my former brother-in-law and very close pal and neighbor, Jim McMillan, who is in Cayuga Medical Center in Ithaca, New York, recovering from a little heart attack that he had yesterday. As for me, I've been involved in UFO studies, often to the extent of everything else in my life, for more than 40 years now, as a researcher and investigator, a writer and author, a media consultant, conference speaker and activist, but never as the host of any radio program. So cut me a little slack if I seem to need it tonight. I'm not unfamiliar with being on the air, however. I have been a guest on hundreds of radio programs and more recently podcasts. I've appeared on a variety of television shows, both here and abroad. And when the folks at KGRA contacted me late last year to consider coming on as a weekly host on my own, my first reaction was that I was flattered. My second thought, quite honestly, was, do listeners and viewers really interested in truly anomalous UFO phenomena and the paranormal really need yet one more program? I wondered. And let's face it, right now, UFOs and the paranormal may not exactly be the first things on our minds. But if so, I asked them if I could think about it for a while, and they were kind enough to say yes. And think about it I did for the next 2 months. I really did want to accept their offer, but only if I could come up with some new approach to these subjects. And given how many high-quality shows and for how long they've been broadcasting, good luck with that, I thought. The fact is, there really are so many great shows, and KGRA and other networks as well. Most of them hosted by extremely knowledgeable people in their fields and in the world of broadcasting. a good number of whom I am honored to count as esteemed colleagues, and many of them longtime friends as well. Anyway, after considering it about 2 months, I felt I had come up with something different, well, on two distinct fronts. And what do I mean by that? Well, let me digress a bit. No matter how deeply involved some listeners may already be with UFO and paranormal-related events, our lives have all been changed, and in many instances extremely dramatically, since March, and not for the better. The novel virus COVID-19 and the restrictions, concerns, fears, and frustrations that have accompanied it for many of us have really thrown a wrench into the works. And the idea of having to stay focused on the subject of UFOs to the extent of lives being lost around us, economies crashing, and the world not knowing really what's going to happen next really has taken precedent. It's also reminded me, and I'm sure many of you, of our own mortality. And that, again, for those of us that are really focused on this subject, it has opened up spaces between. For me, the idea is best summed up by a quotation I remembered from John Kennedy said, which is, "Our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's future, and we are all mortal." Fascinating as the realm of other intelligences visiting is to many of us, the reality of incredibly advanced technology, the ongoing beings from parts unknown, the historic repression of such matters and other forbidden information, the dynamics of what is already going on just behind the curtain of official sanctioned history, reactive cover-ups, the fascination of many with those who have always moved the chess pieces around and determined humanity's destiny. They occur within the parameters of the day-to-day lives we are living, and the dreams and passions which are always in play, as each of us makes what we can of the lives we are living. Whatever else, I think it's fair to say that most of us want to live interesting lives, build on some stability, and ideally filled with friends, friendly acquaintances, family members, and others who share our values and goals. Lives in which we make some sort of contribution to the world around us. And it's just within our own, either just within our own local or community, or for some, possibly on a national or international front. Different individuals, different dreams and goals. Now, for those of you listening who come to this moment with a pre-existing interest in UFOs and or the paranormal, that interest has not emerged in a vacuum. Even the most dedicated of us in this group are also living lives made up of considerably more than these subjects alone. I guess I'm as good an example as anyone I can think of. My overriding preoccupation and professional involvement speaks for itself. But honestly, I cannot imagine my life, nor my having become the person I am, if it were not for my other equally deep involvements and fascinations and interests. Perhaps you take the idea of reincarnation seriously. I certainly consider it. Perhaps you don't. But there is no denying that in a very real sense, all of us in our different ways live a number of different lives as we evolve through the life that we are currently living right here on Earth. We are not the same people we were when we were 5 or 18 or 27 or 34, unless you haven't quite hit that number yet. I look back and think some of the lives I've lived on Earth have been doozies, and I'll return to that subject shortly. I know myself to be a person who has been and remains driven by curiosity. Maybe not surprisingly, I often find myself wondering about what drives and informs the lives of my friends, my colleagues, and the lives of others around me as well. And so, two of the main signposts, so to say, that will be guiding me as a broadcaster certainly have to do with the subject at hand, but more, how did the best-known figures in the fields of UFO studies and paranormal studies, as well as the next generation of up-and-coming investigators, researchers, writers, etc., become the people they became? What are the experiences that form the lives of the best-known, publicly experiencers, UFO abductees, things that we have no idea about? And how can a decidedly UFO paranormal program like mine build on an audience among those of you, not just those of you who already follow this subject, but equally, if not more so, reach out beyond the usual suspects into the far wider potential audience of other listeners tonight? Those of you who for some reason tuned this show in, but previously have had little, if any, interest in UFOs or the paranormal. While these questions have been of deep interest to me for many years, the invitation to host a radio show sparked some deeper thinking on how best to bring more of you into this circle of knowledge and information, of people, a community unto itself. And it's a community that's come to mean a great deal to me over the years and decades. So, in that spirit, I began to put these ideas together, and when the pandemic hit, had to kind of reconsider them. Like all life-changing events, there may have been a point, I'm guessing for most of you like me, it came in March, when the greater reality of what was going on around us really, really sunk in personally. My last out-of-town speaking date was on March 14th, which was a Saturday, in Knoxville, Tennessee. I flew down there on the day before, and I returned the day after on Sunday. I felt uneasy, but I was committed to the conference. I didn't want to back out. I'm a professional. But I think the timeline was that the president declared the national emergency on or about Monday the 16th. So this was really right on the balancing point. Anyway, I gave my talk, and after I did, I went outside the hotel. I thought I'd give my sister Ann a call. Ann's a registered nurse practitioner, and I knew had been keeping on the case with meetings with other medical professionals around the state and around the country. And, got on the phone, told her where I was and how the conference was going and how my talk went. My sister responded in a way I really didn't expect, which was, I know you told me you were going, but had you reminded me, like yesterday, that you were leaving, I would have asked you to cancel. And then she went on to give me an idea of what might, and I stress might, be looking at us over the next 3 months, 12 months, 2 years, 3 years. And I came away from that call somewhat rattled. I felt decidedly uncomfortable for a good part of the rest of the day and departed the next morning. I was one of the few people who at the time was wearing, latex gloves in the airport and a mask. And I had a 5-hour stopover at Dulles International, Washington, D.C.'s airport, normally on a Sunday, one of the busiest airports in the country. I was sitting in front of a TV, as one does at an airport, listening to the latest news and looking around to see nobody. And over the next 5 hours, say 4.5 hours, half an hour before the flight, a couple of dozen people started to come into my area. but I saw no one. It was paranormal as far as I was concerned. And I began to think, when I get home, I need to make a shopping list and on tomorrow morning head out. And then I started to laugh, remembering that fate sometimes taps you on the shoulder and reminds you, that you should be paying attention to something. And occasionally, rarely, it does it twice. And that's when you should really pay attention. And what I was laughing about was realizing in that moment that I had flown out to the conference on Friday the 13th, and I was returning on the Ides of March. Okay, I got the message. And Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday morning, I shopped like General Erwin Rommel's quartermaster about to invade Egypt. My pantry has been nicely stocked ever since. And Wednesday afternoon, I came in the house, I closed the door, I looked at the cat, I sat down, and I started to think about what was going on. Now, why this backstory completely off subject? In UFO studies, in the world of people this concerns, if you are new to this, you will hear more and more talk about something called disclosure. It's with a big D, and it's referring to some ultimate, undeniable disclosure of the fact that we are not alone, etc. Many people have different theories about how it will emerge. I think it's simply happening right now, but not in a geometric way, but in an arithmetic way. More every day rather than a huge jump at one time, although that may come. And I realized I'd been thinking about disclosure for decades before it was called disclosure. And this is coming up while I'm thinking about the pandemic. And then I had really quite an unusual thought, which was, wait, right now something is happening that is giving me a little bit of an idea of part of what disclosure will be like. Now, I'm old enough to have, as a kid, lived through the Kennedy assassination, and I hero worship John Kennedy. It was a terrible day in my life and the lives of many other Americans. I'm a proud native New Yorker and was living in Manhattan on 9/11, had friends who were in the building. I took it very personally. Both of these stories went out around the world, but I realized I had never experienced a moment when I could think to myself, in one way or another, just about everybody in the world right now, save for hermits in the Himalayas or incredibly isolated people, were thinking about the same thing in one way or another at the same moment. And I think that's a lesson we can learn to a degree from the pandemic. It is a reminder that we are all in this together, and that humanity at one time or another coming up may well have to face the implications of truly anomalous UFOs and their occupants. Anyway, as the ideas developed for me on how would one develop a UFO paranormal program that not only, I hope, gains the audiences that listen to my friends and colleagues' show, from the smallest podcast to the legendary Coast to Coast. But again, equally, if not more important, how would one go about reaching out to folks that this didn't matter to and make it begin to matter? How do you do that? How do you make that interesting? Anyway, in that spirit, over these past months, I have been reaching out to more and more of the people in the field, both fields, people whose books I've read, documentaries and films I've seen and admired, who I've heard speak at conferences, read their papers, and those people who are the ones who have had the experiences, without which those of us who do the work around what they've experienced or seen or had happen to them would do best to find another way of either attempting to make a living or to use our time better. Anyway, I came to think that if I could focus in on bringing people into the show every week, folks who follow the work know or think they know, but really don't know. And of course, those of you who are new to the subject don't know at all. What would I do? How would I be if it was me out there in the audience turning on a show like this for the first time and hearing any one of a number of huge names go on about this important case? Or what do you think about this newly revealed document? Or a bunch of documents that have now come up on John Greenwald's wonderful Black Vault that are now accessible for us to see? Or I'd feel a little out of my territory. But I thought if my first exposure to the people in the field was to actually have a couple of hours to get to know them to some degree as people and listen as they talked about how they grew up, the things that were important to them, the things and people that influenced them, the challenges they had to overcome, the breakthroughs that they had when they first realized that this was a path they wanted to pursue. By the time they finished, I'd be in a pretty good position to say, I think this person's really interesting and they seem smart. And I never thought about it much before, but I think I'd like to read one of their books. Now, for those of us steeped in this stuff who know their work, it'd be an opportunity for the first time to actually get to know more about them. And as I said before, how they became the people that they became. And so I quietly started to make a list of everybody in the work whose work I admired, many of whom I knew, many of whom were friends or friendly acquaintances, and just started to cold call them. At first I thought I could write up a nice form letter, but I thought, no, that's not the way I want to do this. And it took several months, but I called dozens, and literally every one of them that I spoke to. And for those of you in the know, so to say, they're pretty much all names that you're familiar with. Every one of them said, yeah, I would like to do an interview like that, and nobody's ever asked me before. So I started to work a calendar and book them. Now, several months of quietly reaching out to them really paid off, but as I did it, I began to think, if I do this show, KGRA has basically said, handle it any way that you like. And I thought, why not kick out the jams a bit and contact people who might have an interest in the subject just outside the field or way outside the field. And so I began to get in touch with writers and authors, filmmakers, actors and directors, mental health professionals, educators and academics, professional investigators of other subjects, painters, sculptors, musicians, singers and songwriters, religious leaders, teachers, scholars, psychics and blue-collar workers, and other men and women from all walks of life, but having particularly memorable accounts to share and memorable stories to tell. So, the upshot of all this is that for the first few months of Meanwhile Here on Earth, and possibly well into the spring, the guests who will be joining me are drawn almost exclusively from the former group, major world-class contributors to our understanding of the reality of truly anomalous UFO phenomena and paranormal investigations. Likely already enough of them that if I had booked them all, it could be well into the fall. At that point, when I come to the end of the current bookings, I'm going to start integrating some of these other people into the weekly format. Now, for those of you that decide to become regular listeners to this show, I will be listening to what you have to say about that. For some of you, you're interested in listening to a show that's strictly paranormal, and I respect that. And some of the guests may interest you less. For those of you that do have other interests in your life, even if this is a primary one, you may like that. And if you're new to the subject, for me, this is the way life is. It's all mixed up together. And this is an experiment that I want to give a solid try to. If it works, I'd like to keep doing it. Now, within the next couple of months, here on KGRA, I'll be establishing a separate presence on what I'll call KGRA, meanwhile, Here on Earth Digital Television. Now, this separate entity will ultimately contain a wide and growing variety of additional material, conversation interviews, panel discussions, world-class storytellers, but of the factual kind, and full PowerPoint presentations, lectures and talks by myself and many respected associates. Also, extended slideshow presentations. As a longtime passionate, sometimes professional photographer, well before everybody traveled with the camera with their amazing smartphones, I always traveled with the camera. And now, of course, it's no big deal. But I've taken photographs wherever I've gone, kind of always with two goals in sight. That one perfectly composed, frozen, magic moment, and a zillion photos in a row that tell a story when you show them one after the other. Kind of like a very slow movie made up of stills and somebody telling you a story. And as such, I've already been working these things out in my mind and creating the files. And once it is up and running, first, as a long-time walking tour guide of the great city of New York, I have ever so many walks through the neighborhoods of my hometown, many of them now in the course of being changed forever. But more full drives through the wide open spaces this country is so rich in, other countries as well. A train ride in part of France, strolls through London and Paris, a stroll through Rome. And once I'm able to fully begin to digitize my Kodak Nikon color slides going back decades, we'll be able to travel together through India as it used to be, the Soviet Union, Nepal, and many other wonderful locations. Now, meanwhile, Here on Earth TV, so to say, will be part of a pay-per-view area, and I'm still working out the details on it. It will be very modestly priced for the items, and an opportunity to do things that there's no way I can really do on television. My professional background includes not just 40 plus years of involvement in UFO studies, but as someone whose interests and friendships are deeply rooted in the lives I've lived, both in tandem with and prior to my life in ufology. I worked construction jobs in Lower Manhattan for most of my 20s to help support myself as an aspiring artist. I worked my way across the Atlantic as a deckhand on a Norwegian freighter and lived, ate, and breathed the New York City art world for more than a decade. I spent years working in both management and production in off-Broadway theater and summer stock productions, primarily with certainly one of the greatest standing repertory companies in the history of New York City, the Mirror Repertory Company. And to some degree, with some of the most brilliant stage and screen actors, Academy Award winners, Tony Award winners, and many great actors whose faces you'd recognize in a second and whose names you have no idea of. I've traveled extensively in more than 25 countries, met and spent time with the famous, the infamous, and the not so famous, but incredibly interesting people. For 30 years now, whenever I've been able to, I've audited John Strasberg's master acting classes. John, for my money, is the best acting coach working in America now and maybe the world. Not because I wanted to be an actor, but because I came to love working with and being inspired by these uniquely talented people. And because doing so helped me to become the best speaker I was capable of without ever having to resort to acting. I'm proud of my years working as a painting instructor at my alma mater, the School of Visual Arts in New York City, and have taught painting and drawing classes at every level from first grade through postgraduate studies. I'm equally proud of the 8 years I spent as a well-trained crisis intervention volunteer on, to be blunt, the busiest suicide hotline and crisis intervention center in America, 4 years of which I was also a shift supervisor. I've been an active photographer since I was in my early 20s and, again, am an experienced New York City walking tour guide. I put in my time in the music business, management, in bands, band photographer. I've worked as an editor, graphic designer, documentary film consultant. I expect that I'm also the only ufologist to be awarded gold and platinum records for art direction, not music. I'm a best-selling author, even while the book in question was brought down in scandal several years ago due to the falsehoods perpetrated by my co-author that got by me. So it goes. You live and you learn. I worked as a diamond and precious gem courier for 2 years, bonded by Lloyd's of London, moving goods around New York City, and have been a house painter, an apartment painter, a journeyman carpenter, and a good listener and a friend wherever I can be. Now, back to the world of UFO studies. In December of 2017, a seismic shift in the way that the media treated the subject of UFOs was set in motion by a series of articles in the New York Times. Ufology's best known and most respected figure in that area, not that she is a ufologist, but Leslie Kean is a highly respected, board-certified, so to say, journalist. She and New York Times staff writer Ralph Blumenthal and a third writer whose name escapes me at the moment wrote a piece for one of the Sunday editions of December 2017 that a lot of people see as the beginning of this. In fact, it goes back several months earlier when UFOs, I think, ranking statistician Cheryl Costa, who lives here in Syracuse, New York, was interviewed by the Times, and the article was treated with respect. Now, to digress here for a moment, we are now in the first few years of a new era in ufology, or the modern age of UFO phenomena that began in 1947, that is increasingly free of ridicule. Now, for me, how the subject of anomalous aerial phenomena got wired up with being made fun of at a certain point in my work and my self-assigned projects became as interesting to me as the phenomena itself. And what I mean by that is this. In an otherwise sane world, let's say you and I are neighbors, and we run into each other on the street one day, and you say to me, you know, Pete, the most interesting thing happened to me yesterday or last night. I was mowing the grass, or I was playing with the kids, or I was outside. We were doing some barbecuing last night, and I looked up, and I saw this thing, or these things, in the sky. And they were zigzagging around, no bigger than stars. They were the size of 2 battleships. They were round, or oval, or rectangular, or triangular. And they were doing things. I'm not, any physicist, but I know there are certain things that aircraft can't do. You can't stop a plane, make a right angle turn. And they were doing this stuff, and I wonder what they were. Now, in that mythical, sane world, I might say or think to you, gee, that's interesting. I wonder what they were too. So how did it happen that starting in 1947, people who came forward and made some statements as simple as that were immediately seen, and people were conditioned to think of them as, what's wrong with that person? Are they mentally disturbed? Are they some kind of weird mystic? Do they want to feel special? Are they under the influence of drugs or alcohol? Are they trying to con me in some way? Do they want to be famous? They're trying to make money. It's also counterintuitive. It makes no sense whatsoever. And starting in the later 80s, kind of in between breaks from a project I spent years pursuing, I started to haunt the New York Times newspaper morgue. Now, this is all pre-digital. And the way that it worked back then was, for people of a certain age, it was a little like researching a high school paper back in the day. You would go through, in this case, these huge volumes of articles. They were like something out of Charles Dickens. Thousands and thousands of entries in small print by year and by subject. And you'd write down on your notepad the articles you were looking for, the code names. Then you would take that information to the librarian, who would pull the microfilm or the microfiche, which you would put on the machine, find in a manual way, put your quarter in the machine, and print out the article or photograph or letter from the editor in question. And for me, not being a gambler, it was as close to Las Vegas slot machines as I got. And I began to build a collection of these. The way I approached it was, I thought of every possible acronym or reference or wording that would be used to look for these subjects. They were first referred to as aerial discs, unidentified aerial phenomena, flying saucers, of course. And when I looked, for example, for spaceships, I went back to 1946 just to be sure, I found nothing. When I looked for extraterrestrial, I found nothing. I learned, when I stumbled on it, that in 1940s, the word spaceship and the word extraterrestrial didn't exist. It was space, ship, and extraterrestrial. And I began to put these documents together, then went back to my main project. Several years later, when I picked up on it again, everything had been digitized, so I could work from a computer and continued to download all of these articles. By the time I finished, I guess this would have been half a dozen years ago or so before I moved on to other things, I had something like, 220, 230 articles. I focused in on the New York Times because they were arguably the flagship of American journalism at the time this happened. They remain a very influential newspaper, agree with them or not. And I put all of them in order once I had the full collection, and I read them. And then, being me and coming at things as artists sometimes do, being trained to work outside the box and think outside the box, I read them again. And it wasn't just articles. It was editorials, letters to the editor, commentaries, photo captions, anything that had anything to do with these subjects. I knew what I was looking for. I just didn't know exactly how to get to it. I was looking for a pattern, whether it was in the most extensive coverage or a small piece on one paragraph, page 18, about some sighting who knows where. And as is the case for me, being a cheerful insomniac, it hit me about 2:30 one morning after reading through this tome for whatever number time that I had it. And it was this. Initially, whether it's in one sentence or several paragraphs, the reporter lays out the alleged account. Then, either on their own or bringing in a quote-unquote authority figure. And early on in the 40s, they often didn't even name the authority figure. It was a psychologist of some repute or a well-known physicist, then explained to us in the most condescending way where we had gone wrong, where we had missed the point. And I can't give you an exact statistic, but I can tell you that I'd say 97%, certainly above 95% of every article, column, editorial, letter to the editor regarding flying saucers, then UFOs, starting in 55 or 56, was, to one degree or another, condescending, sarcastic, dismissive, and for a rational person seeking serious answers, insulting. That began to change again in late 2017, but not before I became so focused on this subject of the origins of ridicule that for several years that was the subject that I was presenting. Those were the papers I was writing. These were the conference talks I was giving. It's still interesting, and it's now become kind of a footnote to UFO history. At the same time, when the things started to change in 2017, I thought it was a passing fad. I waited a year, in a way, knowing in my arrogant way that it was just going to disappear and the media was going to start making fun of them again. But isn't it interesting? And I say this to you if you are a serious long-time student of it, or again, you're fairly new to the subject. When was the last time in any news show that you watch or any major newspaper that you read that you saw an article about an alleged UFO sighting or event that was really sarcastic, or the old traditional newsreader looking at you like, folks, I'm just reading this. You know I don't believe it. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Turning to the newsman, so, Bill, what do you think about these flying saucers? And then, ha, ha, ha. It's gone. And it's gone on both sides of the aisle. You can turn on Fox and see Tucker Carlson making his very serious face as Nick Pope talks about the latest UFO incident, or you can turn on CNBC or CNN. It doesn't matter whether you're coming at it from the left or the right. Things not only have changed, but that change seems permanent. And this past year, if it had not been for the pandemic, I think it's fair to say that some of the cases that broke and some of the pronouncements that were made by media and government figures and established legitimate scientific spokespeople bespeak a much more serious approach to it. It was this summer, I guess, in August. One of the many things that kind of jumped out at me was the fact that the Navy has acknowledged to some degree that it is not out of the question that there not only have been crashes of truly anomalous advanced craft from parts unknown, but there have been recoveries. And reports need to be written. This material needs to be studied. A few short years ago, this would have been a joke. You know, those of us that do this work have been considered to a great degree society's outsiders. And it doesn't seem that long ago to me, but it is long ago when I got into this work shockingly quickly in the later 1970s with a vengeance. The field was not even really interested in looking into allegations of beings or abductions. Let's face it, if you were a member of the UFO research community in, say, 1977, the overwhelming likelihood was that you were a middle-aged white guy, that you were making a living doing something, but this was your passion, and you wanted to be taken seriously. So focus in on radar returns and what we call trace cases, where organic material goes through a transformation when it comes into contact with an alleged anomalous phenomena, or statistics, or lights in the night sky. But as one of our better-known people in the field, Dr. David Jacobs, said to me years ago, we were focused on the cars, not the drivers. And again, it was an effort to sidestep potential ridicule, which Lord knows was going to come at you if indeed you kept putting yourself forward in this work. Again, it's also a great reason to begin to take this subject seriously right now, in this moment in time where pandemic be banned. Things are changing in this work, and things are changing, I think, in the mindset of officialdom. It used to be, in my mind anyway, for years that the secret keepers, they might have fought among themselves. Some wanted to open up, some didn't, but they kept their secrets. Now I think it's a matter of crisis management. It's all coming undone. And at the same time, you can't just let it all out at the same moment. I know, and some of you in the field also know folks who felt like I did when I first got into this, of power to the people, tell us what you know, we're ready, we can handle it. Well, we're talking to ourselves. And the we in question actually represents a small demographic within the greater American population, and certainly within the greater world population. And the fact that you may be ready for disclosure does not really take into account that for every one of you, there are X number of very decent folks doing their best to live their lives, raise their kids, work a job, be good neighbors, pay their taxes, hope their Social Security by the time they need it, hope for health coverage, who are not ready at all. And I think our so-called disclosure movement, which I very much support, and I'm very proud of people like Steve Bassett, who has done so much to bring this information to so many and help to organize groups not just around the country but around the world. Granted, they're modest, but they're helping to educate each other and then educate people around them. It's, for me, again, a very exciting time in this work. And if you are listening tonight, and this is new to you, and you might want to start listening regularly, you've chosen a good moment. It is sad to think, well, actually, I'll hold that till after the break. When we come back, though, I'm going to tell you to start with how and why I got involved in this subject. I was a very lucky kid. I had a overall very happy childhood. If you're looking for a Dickensian story of somebody overcoming great odds to live a happy life and, all people trying to beat me down in circumstances, go look for somebody else. I had a goofily happy childhood overall. And being severely dyslexic, a term I never even heard until I taught private school at a very upscale school in a very nice part of Brooklyn. At a teacher's meeting with the school psychologist, the word dyslexia came up, And I thought, oh my God, that's me. All I knew was I was bad in math, and I better be developing my drawing skills, which were prolific. I was a very gifted young artist. My parents and my grandparents supported it in every way. I had private oil painting lessons by the time I was 8 years old. I ended up studying at and teaching at, I think, the greatest art school in America. But the story of how I came to have my earnest career derailed by this subject is one worth relating to you. And again, especially because a lot of these shows to come, certainly for the first months, and then we'll keep returning to that format, is going to be about asking people to tell us some of the more intimate details of their lives, and again, how they became the people they are. I felt as a consequence of that, I should do the same with you listeners tonight, so you have an idea of who I am, how I became that way, and again, why I take this subject so damn seriously. And at the same time, if it was just this subject, I think I'd be a very morose character. I am very glad to have immersed my life and continue to in many other interests. Now, we're coming up toward a break in the next 2 minutes or so, and I want to just give a special shout out because I know this audience is composed of a lot of people I really care about. Friends from my life in theater, certainly in ufology, people I've met when I've traveled, folks I knew going to high school, some of my dearest, oldest friends from Hewitt School, friends I went by to the first grade with. I love you all, and we're going to be back very, very shortly, right after this break.
Why is it we're not very good with our health regimen until it's too late? We don't put oil in the car until the engine blows up. When the body's out of balance, your health is not so good. Give your body some love. Log on to GetTheT.com. That's GetTheT.com. Try our Life Change Tea, which cleanses you from harmful intruders. A clean colon is one of the ways to bring the body in balance. We also carry organic supplements to help you get where you need to go. So do your body a favor. Log on to GetTheT.com. That's GetTheT.com. You can even visit our sales page to save some dough. Does anybody call money dough anymore? Anyway, if you're looking for short, helpful health tips, go to YouTube and punch in Health Matters Now. That's Health Matters Now. So, log on to GetTheT.com, shop, get balanced, then learn some cool tips at Health Matters Now. You'll be glad you did. That's GetTheT.com.
The KGRA Vault is filled with classic interviews designed to stimulate the minds of critical thinkers for generations to come.
On August 8, 1980, it was 10 minutes to midnight. All three security policemen watched a very bright light travel at great speed and suddenly stop in the air right above them. According to an official Kirtland Air Force Office of Special Investigations complaint, the three security policemen watched the light land in Coyote Canyon. Then 2 weeks later, on August 22, 1980, three more security policemen assigned to Kirtland Air Force Base saw more bright aerial phenomena land in Coyote Canyon. The source and evaluation of these events described in the official AFOSI complaint form was Major Ernest Edwards, commander of the 1608th Security Police Squadron Monzano at Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque. The AFOSI official complaint form was written and signed by OSI Special Agent Richard C. Doty, who is our guest on Phenomenon Radio tonight. 2 months after the unidentified aerial phenomenon was interacting with the highly classified and restricted.
Discover thousands of hours of conversations with those truly dedicated to leaving a truth legacy behind for us to follow. Research materials and alternative subjects that interest you, like Bigfoot, UFOs, ghosts and hauntings, conspiracies, alternative histories, unsolved mysteries, and so much more on KGRA Classics, found deep in the KGRA vault. Make contact.
Hey everybody, Rachel Ray here. Nothing brings a bigger smile to my face than cooking up a big meal for the whole family and lots of friends. But there's not enough room at my table for the 17 million kids in our country who struggle with hunger. That's why the Feeding America nationwide network of food banks collects surplus food to give hope to hungry kids. But they can't do it without your help. Support Feeding America and your local food bank at feedingamerica.org.
A message from Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Are you intrigued by Paranormal Talk Radio? You'll love the new Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live. You'll find a great selection of talk shows covering UFOs, ghosts, strange phenomena, and much more. Download the Paranormal Radio app now and start listening to the very best in paranormal talk entertainment, including the network you're listening to right now, the Paranormal Radio app. Free in Google Play and the iOS App Store.
Expand your perception of reality.
Guys, the best.
Yeah. KGRARadio.com.
And we're back. Now, let me take you back to the mists of time, the origins of all things, the early 1960s. I was born in New York City, my sister Helen also. And when we were kids, our folks following the then American dream moved us out of the cities, not even into suburbia, but to really quite a wonderful little village about 30 miles east of Manhattan. It's still there, and it's called Rockville Center. And one gets nostalgic if you're lucky enough to have grown up in a place like that as the years pass. But it really was, especially as you grow older and you compare notes with people on their childhoods, a very special place to grow up. Overnight, I went from being a city kid to being a block away from a state park and being able to disappear into the woods for the day. When I was old enough, I could get on the Long Island Railroad, and 40 minutes later, I'd be in Penn Station. I could go to the most exotic place I had ever been in my life, Chinatown, and have a great lunch for next to nothing. I could go see a matinee at the theater for an astonishingly low amount of money, walk around, visit my grandparents. True freedom. As a kid, my primary interests from 7 years old up until about 14 years old were drawing and painting. My dyslexia was mostly about numbers, but it affected my reading a bit, and I didn't really start to read with a vengeance until I was about 8. And then, good luck, I've never stopped since. I collected stamps, which made me wonder and think about the countries these little pieces of paper that had come from and the wonderful little images on them. I collected and observed bugs. I was a very proud Cub Scout and graduated to being a proud Boy Scout. I loved woodcraft. The fate of the Boy Scouts organization aside, it was a wonderful experience for me, and I think the guys that I went through it with. All the more so because my dad was an assistant scoutmaster, and it was a great bonding experience. And I would say by the age of 14, I was about as sophisticated as a then well-known television character named Beaver Cleaver in the eternally charming Leave It to Beaver. On Saturday afternoons or mornings, sometimes myself and a few of my geeky little friends would make our way to the Fantasy Theater in downtown Rockville Center, and for again an obscenely small amount of money, watch a B double feature with cartoons and sometimes a news strip. And often they involved flying saucers and creatures from other planets. I don't remember any of them ever being very friendly, and I grew up to understand that this was all in good fun. Nothing, maybe for you as well, in my formal education, my religious education, going to synagogue, Central Synagogue, Reformed Jewish synagogue in Rockville Center. Nothing in any of the books that I read, nothing that any other kid told me in any way suggested that we were being visited by other intelligences from parts unknown in advanced craft. And on this particular late morning, my sister Helen and I were goofing around as kids do on the front lawn. And if you've ever lived in a small town or a little village, I think you know the moment I'm about to set. It's quiet, and for whatever reason, there are no other kids around. There's no adults around. There's no cars going by. The Good Humor ice cream truck is absent. It's the wind and the trees and you. And it was a perfectly beautiful morning. Not a cloud in the sky. And I caught something out of my right peripheral vision above. And I said, and when I say I said, this is not from my conscious memory of that moment, but from that moment being recovered. I repressed the memory. It came back years later, and then I confirmed it in 3 different hypnotic regressions with 3 different practitioners. I looked up, and I either said, Helen, or look, and we both watched as 5 silvery white, disc-shaped ovals approximating, I don't know, if it depends if they were as big as a Piper Cub or a commercial airplane. They were close enough that we could see regular detailing around each, that we could only read the same way that windows on a commercial airliner would look at an appreciable distance. They weren't shiny like stainless steel, but more like aluminum that had been brushed or something. And they came in without a sound, and they stopped like a freeze frame in a film, and they just hung in the air over the Parker's house across the street. And we looked, and we looked, and we looked. Not a word passed between us. Now, my reaction, I found out many years later, was very different than my sister's. And it's one that I have documented and chronicled, I'm sure, more than 100 times with sighting witnesses. And it goes something like this. You're minding your business, living your life, and you look up and you see a thing or things that you've never seen in the sky before, and it's whatever they are real to your eyes, and you say to yourself, not a plane, not a blimp, not a helicopter, not a kite, not a strange-shaped cloud, not birds, not flotsam and jetsam, not a reflection from the ground. What am I looking at? And I knew they were oval, like a dinner plate tipped at a slight angle. And they were hanging there, and they weren't making any noise, and there was no question that they had no appendages whatsoever. In my recovered memory, and I waited until I was really ready to undergo hypnosis with these 3 individuals, and I understand from all of them I entered alpha state very deeply. I wasn't looking with anxiety so much as I was there again. I was 14 years old. On the recording of one of them, it's particularly moving to me because I'm using words and phrases that I had completely forgotten about. I'm wearing a polo shirt as opposed to a t-shirt. I'm wearing my dungarees rather than jeans. I've got my Keds on. And my last attempt to put words to what I was seeing was such a innocent 14-year-old phrase. I've never used it before since. Secret government test plane. Maybe there's some kind of secret government test plane. But I knew there weren't. It began to dawn on me that everything I thought I knew was now open to question, because those things that were funny, scary, but funny in the movies I saw, they were real. And I don't know, we intuit things as kids. We're not stupid. And I understood that this was a subject for ribbing people about, that there was ridicule attached. There's another thing that was going on with me at 14 years old, and it had to do with the wonderful world of girls. Now, I was about the nerdiest nerd in Nerdville, and I was the shortest kid in my class. I wore glasses. Sports, what is that? Let me listen to a record or read a book or catch a bug or watch a praying mantis or. And I knew if I ever talked to any one of my friends about this, and they ever talked to any girl at Southside Junior High School about Peter talking to them about this, there was this thing called sex I was really, really interested in starting to have. Not that that happened right away, but I knew all girls in the world are connected, and you tell one, and they will all learn about it, and they will all think I'm crazy, and I will never have a girlfriend in my life. And I am only half joking, only half. And at a certain point, and Helen and I, more than 14 and a half years later, when we first talked about this, that was when my memory returned, we both estimated that that time was several minutes long. Now, especially in kid terms, that is forever. I had it at a certain point. My anxiety had peaked to such a point that I turned on my feet without saying a word to her and headed for the front door. I knew, and she confirmed later. She said, I knew where you're going. You were running to the house to tell Mom. Our mom was in the kitchen right then and there, or about then. Well, she was when I went into the house. I don't know how much time passed, making us lunch. Anyway, I start to run as fast as I can, and within 2 or 3 seconds, I'm almost at the walkway that will take me to the front door. And something happens to me that is so profoundly fascinating to me, and something I'd never experienced. I'm not spinning this. I don't lie. I forgot about those things in the sky. What was happening to me to make that happen? All of a sudden, I felt like I was running through molasses. My world had slowed down to such a degree that everything was in slow motion. And as is the case in such experiences, there was no fear, no anxiety whatsoever. I was just fascinated. And I started to fall. Now, in real life, I now understand that whatever happened to me was happening in real time. I only experienced it in slow motion, and that I ultimately fell and skidded into the walkway coming toward the front door. But before everything went blue for a split second and then went black, I remember my 3 last thoughts. My first thought was how beautiful my mother's hydrangea bushes looked. She was a wonderful gardener, and they had pale blue flowers on them, and they just, such a pretty hedge. My second thought was, I'm coming in toward the sidewalk, and where the sidewalks are scored, and these were old sidewalks, so they'd kind of cracked a bit, that was where an ant nation was establishing its new country. There were lots of ant hills along the way, And as a smaller child, moving from the city, I realized, boys can be so cruel. And hopefully you have a moment where you realize what you're doing and you treat living things more kindly. But as a 7, 8-year-old, I had a magnifying glass. And you could get firecrackers just from a friend in elementary school. And what could be more fun than emptying a firecracker into an anthill and then aiming your magnifying glass at it? I was a bug Nazi, it is true. And I had that moment with a daddy long-legged spider who I was experimenting on to see how many legs it needed to stand on. These are things I rarely tell anybody, but now the world knows. And at that moment realized what I was doing and have gone out of my way to not hurt living things since then. It was quite profound. Anyway, I'm coming to the ground. I'm looking at the anthills and thinking, oh, look, the ants are making this new civilization and things. How nice. I'm getting closer and closer. Gosh, that's so interesting. My last thought before I passed out for the first time in my life, or was knocked out, was, what a beautiful day this is. It's just gorgeous. Bang, I'm gone. Well, a certain amount of time passes, and I come to. And my first momentary feeling is absolute rage, which I repress. My second is a throbbing in my right forearm, and I look, and I see that I've skidded into the sidewalk and scraped the skin off, and only boys think like this. And there it is on the tape. I look at it, and I say to myself, my 14-year-old self, wow, what a scab that's going to be. Red badge of courage, baby. Well, I look around. Helen's gone. They're gone. Nothing in the sky. Feel a little unsteady, but stand up. I'm fine. And I walk into the house. Before I go in to talk to Mom, my intuition tells me that I should just check upstairs. Both my sisters shared a bedroom at the top of the stairway. And I looked in, could see right in before I got to the top of the stairs. And Helen was there looking out the window into our backyard with her back to me. I thought, private moment, leave her alone, walk back down, walk through our living room to our dining room, and I stand in the hallway, in the doorway at the kitchen. And there's my mom, our mom at the stove. I think she was making grilled cheese sandwiches. And I do remember word for word what I said to her. Mom, Helen and I just saw some things in the sky over the Parker's house that look like flying saucers from the movies. Now, in my work chronicling this subject, and in my many years of working as the assistant to a man who is arguably really the father and the pioneer of scientific UFO abduction studies, a great guy we lost in 2011, Bud Hopkins. I have met and spent time with hundreds of people that have had these experiences. And in that category of people who remember how they reacted when their child told them, and sometimes they reacted in a way they regretted, putting their own anxiety first and, oh, honey, you just thought it looked that way, or a child, now a grown-up, remembering how inappropriate they felt their parents' response was to them. My mother turned and she looked at me very seriously. And I remember thinking in that moment, this is the way grown-ups look at each other. And did not feel the need to comment on it, which I think if you're ever in that position, if you're a parent, that's not a bad way to go. If you don't know just what to say, don't feel that you have to say anything, but acknowledge the communication. Well, at this point, for what it's worth as an aside about regression, and hypnotic regression is considered very controversial in many circles, my experience, my knowledge, my observations would compel me to tell you that it all is based on the quality, the intentions, the technique, and the character of the practitioner. Well, we had our dinner, our lunch, right after which I grabbed my bike, Drove the mile or so to the Rockville Center Public Library. I wanted a grown-up explanation for what I had seen, to explain it away in some boring conventional way. In the early 60s, there were lots of UFO books in libraries, and I just grabbed 2 off the shelf, didn't even look at them, said something about flying saucers, UFOs on the spines, took them home, went up to my room, closed the door, and looked at them. Boy, did I choose the wrong 2 books. One was about my saucer trip to Venus. The other turned out to be one of the most important and best-known so-called contactee classics, a book by George Adamski, and a scientist who later went on to distinguish himself in the natural sciences, Desmond Leslie, called Flying Saucers Have Landed. And I remembered that because I remembered the cover of the book, which is distinctive. But while I'm looking at my mom making our sandwiches, it was either Bud Hopkins or Detective Sergeant Pete Mazzola of the New York Police Department, both very well-trained regression in regression. Whichever one it was said to me, "What time is it?" I don't know. "Is there a clock in the room?" Yes. "Where's the clock?" On the wall up to the right of my mom. "Look at the clock." Okay. "What time is it?" 20 after 12. Well, I wanted to take the books right back. It was getting later in the afternoon. I took them back the next day. Why is that important? Well, within a matter of weeks, and don't ask me how we human beings can do this, I had simply made myself forget what had happened, what we had observed, and then started to, become more social, interact with the other kids more, get through a fair amount of my adolescent anxieties, get to make out with girls finally, get some cooler clothes, joined the school singing groups, the theater groups, and started to emerge as, a younger version of the person I became. At my late 20s, I was really starting to live the dream that I had been following since I was a kid, and understood that there were grown-ups in this world who, like me, love to paint and draw and make stuff. And there were other grown-ups who were willing to give them, these artist grown-ups, money for the stuff that they made like next to free. And that's what they did to make money to pay for stuff rather than go to the office like my dad or like so many other dads I knew. I thought, this is what I am going to do. And I was actually beginning to do it. I was starting to show my work. I had recently at that point had an appointment to have an up-and-coming, then unknown gallery owner come over and take a look at my work and find it interesting enough that she made an appointment to come back 6 months later. And during most days, I was working on tearing apart old buildings in Soho and framing carpentry and teaching my class of visual arts at night. I had it going. Why the memory came up at that moment, I can tell you why I think. I think the most important reason was that I was ready to deal with it. And not long before that, a month or so, I had met a woman, as painting instructors do. In one of the most interesting ways, she was a figure model for me, for my class, and she worked for us for 3 weeks. And I met her without her clothes, and I was very taken by her. Very professionally, I waited until the class was over to let her know anything about how I felt. And she very kindly told me she was involved, but that she thought I was a very nice guy. And then maybe as a kindness that she had done something recently she had learned a great deal from. Maybe I might be interested in doing it too. And I thought to myself, whatever it is, I'll do it and win her away from her boyfriend. I'm such a realist. It was something called EST that I had never heard of. Who knew about human potential movement? It's $300. Where would I get that? I borrowed the money. I did it. She was there at my what we call graduation after I got it. What it was, I don't really remember, but nothing happened there. But I was opened up in that manner. And it was also just past Chinese New Year's. Now, under Mayor Giuliani, he really kind of closed down the ancient tradition of fireworks in Chinatown during that wonderful holiday. And if you've ever lived in a Chinatown during Chinese New Year's, you feel like you're in a cheerful war zone. You're smelling cordite, you're kicking through ankle-deep fireworks wherever you go. The smell of gunpowder overtakes the smell of the Chinese food in the neighborhood. And the capper was, sometime before that, my grandmother had surprised me with a portfolio of drawings I had done as a child, a boy, from about 6 years old to about 14. None of them dealing with the subject at all. But I was looking at them. I was sitting on the floor of my loft, and I got to some of the drawings I had done probably within a very short span of time from when this event happened to Helen and I as kids, and something started to collapse in my mind. And within a matter of moments, that memory returned with such a vengeance that I thought I might be going crazy or having some kind of mental episode. How can anybody forget the most amazing thing they've ever seen in their life? Well, sadly, we know it's a common occurrence in more conventional, more tragic trauma, sexual abuse, a terrible accident, something that a young person may need to put out of their mind. And I sat on the floor. I started to break up. I calmed myself down with this whole cycle of images going through my mind like on a tape loop. Had a cup of tea, washed my face, and thought, what do I do now? I knew what I was going to do now, which was call my sister and find out if she remembered the same thing. I also knew I did not want to say, Helen, do you remember? But yes or no? Because she'd say yes or no, and I'd never really know if she remembered the same thing. So when I reached her, she lived a mile or so north of me in the East Village, a struggling poet at that time. It's a good time to talk, yes. And I remembered something from childhood. I need to know if you remember it. I don't want to tell you for this reason, but let me set the scene. It was a beautiful day, I think in June. We were standing by the rock garden in front of the house. You were about 6 feet to my left, and she stopped me laughing and said, stop, I know what you're talking about. And then proceeded to tell me just what I've shared with you, but of what we saw in the sky, but wasn't sure whether it was 5 or 6, which we settled very quickly the next day, because after we got off the phone, I did my first UFO-related drawing painting and did 6 knowing it was 5. Had her come over, or brought it over there, I forget. But when I showed it to her, I covered the one in the lower right, then took my hand away, and she also remembered that it had been an even V formation, so it had to be an odd number. Well, in that moment, I thought, oh, my God, they're real? Oh, my God, they're real. And then she said something that completely derailed the life that I had been living and resulted in me sitting here before this microphone with you rather than somebody else. She said, but there's more. And then proceeded to tell me what had remained conscious memories. She had never forgotten this. It was something she didn't feel compelled to talk about. She had never forgotten that. She said, at that point, when you peeled off to my right, I knew you were running into the house to tell Mom, but nothing was going to take my eyes off these things. These are the most amazing things I had ever seen. Probably the reaction most of you feel that you would have had, well and good. She said, but within like 2 seconds, I saw something that I knew was impossible. What did you see? Well, I saw a blue beam of light shoot out of one of these things, and I turned around to see you in the light, and then the light went out and you went down. And again, you know, I'm a kid, but I knew you couldn't see like a flashlight beam during the day, unless it was very foggy and, you know, catching on a zillion little moisture droplets. And then you went down and I went up. What do you mean? I lifted off the ground, and I started to rise. And the same reaction that I had had as I was going down of no anxiety, no concern. I'm just fascinated with what's happening. She said, I looked down. I guess in some part of my mind, I knew that if something happened and I fell, I'd die. But there you were, getting smaller on the grass and half on the concrete. And for the first and last time, I'm looking at the house, the roof of our house, getting smaller and smaller, and my hair's blowing in the breeze, and I look up, and the bottom of one of these things is getting bigger and bigger, and the next thing I remember, I'm walking or being walked through a curved metal hallway. This, in the lexicon of UFO studies, there is an archetypical being many of you are familiar with, some of them intimately, that is 4 feet high, very emaciated, extremely large cranial structure, black sweeping eyes, hint of nostrils, slit, if anything, for a mouth, basic, generic gray. That term didn't exist. And it didn't exist when it happened, and it didn't exist when we were talking about this in 1975 for the first time. And she described these beings as being, from her 12-year-old words, quote unquote, little doctors with big heads and big black eyes who spoke to me in my head, and one very big one that I knew was the leader. And the next thing she remembers, she is on the metal table, and I say the metal table because they have distinctive features that I don't talk about. It's sort of a safety, but the amount, it's just one of those fascinating details. People who have been taken all over the world, they describe very similar tables, and there are certain things about them, and no anxiety, just looking up and seeing these little ones and the big one, and they are doing some procedure, and there she is with no clothes, a 12-year-old girl, and she is hearing in her head and relating to me, somebody who has never heard anything like this in my entire life. You are special, and then either we've seen you before and we'll see you again, or you've seen us before and you'll see us again. We will not harm you. We love you. Helen's relationship with these beings, she was not a fan. And it began with the way things wired up at that moment when the voice in her head said, we will not harm you. We love you. She was feeling pain. And that qualified as harm in her 12-year-old mind, so she, again, was not a fan. Well, my first thought upon hearing this was, oh my God, my sister's gone crazy. My second thought was, but 7 seconds earlier, or a minute or 2 minutes, it was perfectly okay to have 5 little flying saucers over the Parker's house close enough to see windows. My sister and I, she passed in 2000, were extremely close siblings and dear friends and fellow artists and writers, roommates for years, just great buddies, and we didn't lie to each other. There was no reason, certainly, for her to lie about this. And my life changed in that moment profoundly. And I continued to paint and draw. I continued to teach. But the heart had gone out of it. I was very resentful that something had come along that I knew was more important. And I hated it at first. I wanted to be a successful New York-based artist and was starting on that road. I should say that that art dealer that came back several months later to see a portfolio akin to Richard Dreyfuss's making many copies of The Devil's Tower out of mashed potatoes, her reaction was not good. She felt something had happened since she saw me, and my work made her uneasy. She wished me well, and she left. And if you want to look it up, she went on to become one of the most successful, internationally highly regarded, powerful art dealers in the entire art world. Mary Boone, she is still out there, and I only wish her the best. And I am kind of sorry that things worked out the way they did in one sense. At the same time, I feel privileged to work in this field. And it's been worth it in great part for the people I've gotten to meet, the places I've gotten to visit, the events that have transpired, etc. Now, to jump to the present, it is sad to say that many of us Americans currently find ourselves at loggerheads with each other. I think to a degree, and I think many of you would agree, that we last saw in this country 150 odd years ago with the war between the states. And I have to say, even as a kid, where I grew up, it was called the Civil War, but I like language enough to be precocious with words and know that there is no such thing as a civil war. But one of the main tenets of Meanwhile Here on Earth will be for me to do my best to bring listener viewers of decidedly different backgrounds and beliefs together through conversations and discussions and features in which we can find common ground, or at least have the potential of coming to share a common interest in. Full disclosure, I am as politically partisan as a lot of people are out there, but I do not have an interest in using this program to feed the fires of issues that already so divide us at what really is an unprecedented moment in our history and the world's history. We, those of us who have dedicated ourselves to the study of UFOs and the paranormal, from the best known to the least known, share a common tool in doing our work. And if we're good at our work, we're good at this. It's storytelling, truthful storytelling. The word storytelling often gets a bad rap, and we think of fairy tales as an association, but no. Storytelling to advance our understanding of these fascinating areas of study. The relevance of the subject of truly anomalous UFOs and their implications for humanity, with particular emphasis on the abduction phenomena and experiencer accounts, may well turn out to be one of, if not the most significant key in coming to uniting the human race in the years to come, if we are to be united in the years to come. And it's my intention to assist in that goal in every way that I can as a broadcaster. Now, some of the programs I'm envisioning beyond the first few months of biographical conversation interviews will be really mixing it up. Mental health professionals who have or had abductees or experiencers as clients, abductees and experiencers in dialogue with me and with each other. There are such a great core of individuals out there who run abductee support groups and monthly meetings in different parts of the country. They don't get a lot of recognition, but they are the backbone of regional UFO and paranormal studies. I would like to bring together a number of ministers, rabbis, priests, to talk about the implications of extraterrestrial reality and faith, and religion versus science. Astronomers and scientists on the scientific establishment versus UFOs, and anomalous phenomena in general. Filmmakers and producers, actors and directors on UFOs and the paranormal on film. There's a lot to talk about in terms of conspiracy versus science, and UFOs and politics. Personal stories and accounts, key moments and adventures from my own years in ufology, and the same from colleagues in this and related fields. Memorable meetings with remarkable men and women that I've had. And again, to mix it up, books that I think you would really enjoy reading and films that you might want to see and why. Personal epiphanies, my own, and in the lives of others, events and experiences that have contributed massively to their becoming who they are. the creative process and how key people have applied it to UFO and paranormal studies, and as it applies by artists, writers, musicians, scientists, business people, and others. Unfortunately, given the realities of life's inevitability, conclusion, and death, I will be doing a number of obituaries as we pass through this time together, and thoughts and reflections about significant individuals who have passed, coronavirus related or not. Favorite subject of mine, coincidence and synchronicity, especially those that leave us wondering and occasionally even shaken. Ancient mysteries and those who research and investigate them. The love that some of us have for, it's kind of old-fashioned and analog, but the world of books and becoming our own archivists. Thoughts on building and maintaining a working specialty UFO or other research specialty library. Some talk and reflection, perhaps dialogue, on a phenomenon called confirmation bias that enters tremendously into the field at hand. Our tendency to see what we're already looking for. The importance of being able to alter or change our views when a situation warrants it. And I'll cite my first book here right now. Several years ago, a friend gave me a copy of a book that was then a bestseller nationally called Hillbilly Elegy by a writer named J.D. Vance. I am an intellectual New York Jew. I am a snob in many ways. I'm an urbanite who lives deep in the countryside. I love reading. I love movies. But what J.D. Vance taught me was first telling me about his life. He grew up just outside of Appalachia in a family as problematic in its way, as self-destructive as mine was nurturing. Relatives, close relatives, wrestling with drug addiction and alcoholism, rape, violence, a lack of education, a discouragement from education, and a message that was pounded into his head from the time he was young that he was never going to amount to anything, so why try? But J.D. Vance did try, and he got accepted to a prestigious university, got a degree, went out into the world, ran for office, won, became involved in a healthy relationship, got married. And what he taught me was the moment somebody like me opens my mouth and uses this word or uses the English language the way I do, somebody in his original circle would completely turn me off. The same way that when I was younger and much more judgmental, if I hear somebody with a regional twang who I'm guessing didn't go to university like I did, I might pass a judgment on them and not be very interested in what they had to say. Big mistake. I do have a degree. I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts, major painting, minor filmmaking, thank you very much. But even there, I ask you to cut me some slack. I'm proud to say that where most of my friends who attended college or university got their degree in 4 years, I'm proud to have taken 15 to get mine. That's 2 years of university, 3 years of art school, several years off for good behavior, and then about 7 years of night school, and Bob's your uncle. If you are not like me, and there's anything in my manner that puts you off, give me a chance. I think we all have a lot to learn from each other. And sometimes it's just stuff that you learn on the street or growing up. Other times it's stuff you learn in books. Other topics, ideas. And again, some of these will end up as shows. Other ones will end up in the Meanwhile Here on Earth, KGRA, Digital Television Archive, for separate listening and viewing. science fiction films and their impact on our imaginations and worldviews, not to mention the professional worlds of ufology and paranormal studies. Science fiction films in the light of UFO reality. Conversations and discussions with UFO film historians, documentary filmmakers, film and television writers, directors and producers. I want to mix it up here with painters and musicians, singers and songwriters, other artists with serious interest in UFOs and the paranormal, and in some cases are not. I think we need to pay some attention to the dangers of, as an example of what I was just saying, anti-intellectualism versus the dangers of intellectual snobbery, and on and on. I will definitely be doing a number of ongoing features, either as programs or stuff that you'll have access to in the archive. I know my dear friend and colleague here on KGRA, Lee Spiegel, distinguished journalist, and I are already planning to do a number of back and forths involving, well, the nice way to say it is well-known people we have met and interacted with in our lives. I think possibly that category should be called shameless name dropping. We'll see how it works out. A number of other people in the work who have been kind enough to say, yeah, I'd like to mix it up with you in a continuing way as we go. Now, the fact is we have about a little less than 15 minutes left. So I'm going to cut to some of the goofier things that I am proud of about myself, facts, factoids, and little teasers about stories that I will be putting on the record as we continue down the line. But I felt, what the hell, they're things you might as well know about me as long as we've gotten as close as we have. As a baby, I was kissed by William O'Dwyer, one of the most corrupt mayors in the history of New York City politics. My Aunt Sally had a little clipping of Mayor O'Dwyer kissing me up on her refrigerator in Queens until it fell apart, I remember as a kid. But I thought you should be aware of it. The fact is, my father never tired of telling me that I was conceived when he was absent without leave from the Army. He really missed my mom. And more. I was conceived in the New Yorker Hotel, a hotel that you know if you're a Manhattanite. It's at 34th and 8th. A few years after Nikola Tesla died at that hotel. Now, did these two things happen in the same room? It's not completely out of the question. Should we draw some extraordinary conclusion about me about it? I'm not saying yes, I'm not saying no. While I never considered myself a hippie, I admittedly did come of age in the 60s, and quite enthusiastically at that, as some of you who knew me then will remember. My initial experiences with LSD took place in the paranoia-free days before the controversial drug was made illegal in this country. And my first trip was under the influence of Sandoz pharmaceutical-grade lysergic acid manufactured by the Swiss company that first developed the drug in the 1940s. The experience was most definitely a positively life-changing one, and a number of other experiences followed. Not in recent decades, however. Of course, I attended the very first be-in New York City Central Park, tripping on LSD with my girlfriend, of course, who was a figure model I had fallen in love with. I'm good at that. I lived through the Chicago police riots at the Democratic National Convention of 1968. I demonstrated against the war in the streets of New York, but never made the young men who were unlucky enough to go to it wrong for their convictions. I went to Woodstock, but I never actually got there. And I know the love of my life then, Christine, if you're listening, I know you still haven't forgiven me for that. I apologize again. You know the circumstances, and I really will try to make it up to you in another life. And please send my love to Jake. Now, I was not a witness to the New York City street execution of Mafia godfather Big Paul Castellano and his driver bodyguard, this courtesy of sitting around the corner together in a car, the Godfather in the Wings, John Gotti, and his known associate, Sammy the Bull Gravano. However, I did hear the shots fired from down the block, and I did see the heavily disguised shooters as they made their way right past me as I was waiting at the bus stop. And did I report this to the New York City Police Department? Are you kidding me? Okay. A few examples of my shameless name dropping very quickly. I was, as a teenager, knocked down flat on my back by a very young Liza Minnelli, running toward a stage door late for start of a play she was appearing in. And when I say she knocked me down, I mean on my back and on my butt and landed directly on top of me. I thought, if I ever meet her, I certainly have a conversation starters. Now, in the world of coincidences and synchronicity, about 15 years or so later, while strolling with a friend and her son in Soho, it was Norman Mailer's girlfriend, soon-to-be wife. I was strolling through Soho. Not looking where I was going, certainly without meaning to, I knocked down, then fell directly on top of then America's sweetheart, Mary Tyler Moore. I'm not proud of that. During a quiet moment with Academy Award-winning actor Eli Wallach, I probably became the only person in history to ask him what it was like to have played the ugly in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. His reaction was so much laughter that one of the ushers had to come out of the theater and see why we were being so disruptive. I spent time with actor Kevin McCarthy, star of the 1956 cult classic Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and he shared some thoughts on what it was like to have made that incredible film. The actor Keir Dullea, on what it was like playing astronaut Dave Bowman, Stanley Kubrick's 2001, and what it was like working with Kubrick. I spent time speaking with the actor James Earl Jones on playing the role of Barney Hill in the film Interrupted Journey, which affected him deeply. The actor Malcolm McDowell, best remembered certainly by me for his starring role in Clockwork Orange, told me to my face, up close and personal, that UFOs are blank blank. I can't say those two syllables on the air, but I think some of you may get it. My response, and his response to my response. I have appeared on the stage of New York City's Metropolitan Opera Company with the legendary tenor Luciano Pavarotti in performances of the Grand Opera Aida, and I have sung Don't Fear the Reaper on stage with the Blue Oyster Cult. Novelist Norman Mailer was famous for some of the fights that he got into, many of them literary, but a few of them physical. The fight we got into never got beyond the raised voice stage, but I won the argument, and Norman apologized and gave me an inscribed copy of his later books. Like Howard Hughes, Spencer Tracy, Humphrey Bogart, Burt Lancaster, and Cary Grant, I have kissed Katharine Hepburn. I've had encounters with Paul Newman, Joanne Woodward, Al Pacino, Dustin Hoffman, Christopher Walken, Jacqueline Bisset, Bernadette Peters, Rip Torn, Academy Award winners F. Murray Abraham, Dane Lynn Redgrave, Ann Jackson, Geraldine Page. I had a childhood moment with John Kennedy, and I had a brief conversation many years later with Jacqueline Kennedy. Full disclosure, the Rockefeller family and me, I shook hands as a boy with then New York State Governor Nelson Rockefeller, and many years later, something that I said directly to his older brother Lawrence caused the billionaire to ask my employer to fire me. She told him she would, and she did not. My involvement with Lawrence Rockefeller and UFOs. I could go on, but I think I'll save some of these stories for longer versions, but I see I still have about 2 minutes left. A few travel tale factoids. I read the then recently published best-selling novel The Godfather while camped out just below the peak of a small mountain in Nepal. 10,000 feet isn't much of a mountain there. At a memorable lunch in Kandahar, Afghanistan, I ate, without knowing it at the time, certainly a portion of my all-time favorite animal. I'm doing my best to make it up to all of them ever since. Meow. The experience of being caught in a locust storm while attempting to make breakfast on a beach in South India, something I do not want to repeat. The 3 days and 2 nights I spent riding on the roof of a third-class Indian railway car in North India, along with hundreds of other people on that train, stopping for brief comfort stops and food breaks. I guess I'll hold it for now and just say this is as unusual place to leave a paranormal show as imaginable. Again, when we return, it will be me with a guest. And that guest will be Kathleen Marden, one of the world's most highly regarded scholars and investigators of the UFO abduction phenomena, author, lecturer, and one of the bravest and most extraordinary women I've ever met. The list of people who will be appearing in the weeks and months after her right now read like a who's who of UFO and paranormal studies. Again, I want to thank the folks at KGRA for giving me this opportunity to start a new career where a lot of people are just looking back on old careers, and invite you to stick around, become regular visitors to this show, and let me know what you think so that I can refine my thinking and make this kind of programming something that I can be proud of and that I can build a larger and larger audience around. Have a great week. Stay safe. Have a happy, healthy New Year. And I'll be back here to join you on January 4th. Be kind.